Hi, and in this video I'd like to talk about the importance of proportional representation. Now, I was on Twitter last night and poking around, and someone was saying that Caroline Lucas, now for those who don't know who that is the leader of the Green Party in the UK, who is very much not just campaign on Green. Obviously, parties like that, all parties, I suppose, come out of one issue, and of course the Green Party tells you in the name, doesn't it? Comes out of environmental issues. But she was talking about Brexit and the need for a people's vote, and there's quite a lot of signatories to the petition calling for a vote on the final deal. But there's some people saying, "Oh, I wish she were Prime Minister. Wouldn't it be great if she was Prime Minister?" And to which I said, "Well, there's no point wishing for things like that because she doesn't want to be Prime Minister. If she did, she would not have joined a party that can't possibly get to power." And a couple of people agreed but said, well, but that's not the point. We still wish it was the case anyway. But someone actually came out and said, no, that's not the case. Of course she wants power. Of course she would want to be in government. To which I have to point out that that particular party doesn't even field enough candidates in a parliamentary democracy to ever get to power. If every single one of those candidates won, and only one does win, Caroline herself, then that would still not be enough to form a government. I mean, it would be a very big block. They would certainly, you would think, if the rest of the vote was shared, be able to form a government with someone else. But it's not enough to actually form a government and therefore get those policies implemented. Whereas, let's say she'd have joined one of the major parties, let's say Labour, for example. I'm a Labour supporter. And got to the top of that. And in actual fact, I think there's a bloody good chance she could have done, because what we definitely need at the moment is a leader with some gumption. Then those could have been her policies anyway. Because, some people might argue, oh, but the Labour doesn't have quite the same environmental policies, and that's what's really important. No, I agree, it's really important. But the policies of a party are determined by its leadership. There's nothing set in stone. The policies of the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn today have very different policies to the Labour Party under Tony Blair. And that's the way it is. It changes. There's nothing. Each party has its own character, and therefore there's always certain policies that that a particular party is never going to adopt, unless that changes. There were some policies that were sort of set in stone, for example, for the Labour Party, that Tony Blair had changed before coming to power. And you can argue whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, I would sort of argue it was a bad thing. But nonetheless, that change was made. So, again, that doesn't wash either, because, the policies of a party are determined by its leader, and it's as simple as that. And then I got to thinking as well. So let's say you're a Green supporter. Now, if you're a Green supporter in Caroline Lucas's constituency, that's fantastic, because she wins the seat, or she has done for the last couple of elections. And that's most certainly not a wasted vote. But let's say you vote Green in a different constituency where they have no chance of winning. Is it a wasted vote? I would definitely argue that if you're voting Green Party, let's say because of your deep commitment to environmental policies, if you vote Green in a constituency, say, let's say for the sake of argument, where a Conservative candidate becomes MP, there you may have worked against your own convictions, because no party is fundamentally opposed to environmental responsibility. However, the Conservative Party do stand out as being ones who will sacrifice it for their other core beliefs. Whereas you could argue Labour and the Lib Dems may or may not go far enough with their environmental policies, but it doesn't fundamentally conflict with any of their other core supports. So you can easily, get more environmental responsibility with those parties. So let's say you voted Green, and so many other people did, and a Conservative MP candidate became MP. You've actually worked towards the weakening of environmental law in this country. So should you tactically vote? Now, it's always a very difficult one if you support a particular party, should you vote tactically. For example, I, as a Labour member, would never countenance voting anyone other than Labour. I mean, apart from anything else, it's like a condition of membership. Not that they would know, secret ballot and all that. But I'm in a lucky position because the party I vote for, in places I've lived, hasn't necessarily always returned a Labour MP, but they've always been in with a shout, and therefore you can. I've never lived in a place where you think to yourself, maybe voting tactically would actually be better in terms of my political beliefs for furthering that goal. I've always been able to vote Labour as the most obvious one to vote for anyway. Whereas with some other people, it's a case of should you. And then this comes back to, well, but what if we had proportional representation? Then it wouldn't matter at all. So what proportional representation is? So in UK parliamentary democracy, what we have is you have constituencies, and they're fiddled like you wouldn't believe as well. In theory, you would think, constituencies should be blocks of roughly equal numbers of voters, and each one returns an MP to Parliament. Each one of those MPs gets one vote in Parliament. So that all should work out. But it doesn't work out like that because some constituencies are larger than others. And whenever a government's in power, and it's usually the Conservative Party, they will tend to redraw boundaries whenever they can to give themselves the advantage. And of course, if as a result of the fallout of Brexit, if Scotland does leave the UK, we're completely screwed because they're our only defence, really, against majority Conservative parties like in government. But anyway, so if instead of doing that, and it's always first past the post as well, so you could have a party that gets they finish second in every constituency in the land, say. They won't have any MPs. But they must have garnered enough votes to represent a massive chunk of the population, but they're not represented in Parliament. How can that be right? So a better way, surely, would be that everyone just votes for a party, and then MPs, and according to proportional representation. So you'd still sort of have constituencies, but they'd be grouped together, blocked together. And like maybe counties or something a bit larger than counties, split the UK up into regions. And each one gets a number of MPs according to the share of that vote. And some people have pointed out that that would give UKIP some represent, or it would have done before they fell away after the referendum, would have given some representation in Parliament. Because that's another thing. For people outside the country, they can be forgiven for thinking that UKIP is an actual major political party in the UK and that Nigel Farage was a major politician. But he wasn't. And they weren't. They didn't get any seats at all. But the problem is that they had an awful lot of coverage, which was technically against the media's own guidelines. You're supposed to give coverage on a campaign issue. You're supposed to give coverage according to their share of the vote. And their share of the vote was very small, a few percent. But they gave them way more coverage, which is a bit naughty, but never mind. That was just them being better at PR, let's face it. But the fact is that would give them 2 or 3 MPs. And people said, but that wouldn't be a bad thing, that would be a good thing, because then you'd get to see them and how they actually behave when they're in a position where they can stand up and speak. So that would actually be a good thing. But what more importantly it would mean that there's never any such thing as a wasted vote, because now there is. And I try as a teacher, try and explain to my students how the importance of voting, and it is important that people vote. I'm not agreeing that people should be forced to vote either. There are countries where you're sort of forced to vote. No, in a free society, you should also be free not to vote if you want to. As long as you also understand that if you don't vote, you're also not free to complain about the government, because, you absolved yourself of responsibility by not voting. But the fact of the matter is that there is such a thing as a wasted vote. And with proportional representation, there wouldn't be, because Parliament would be based upon, if 5% of the population voted for a particular party, let's say the Green Party, then they'd have 5% of MPs there representing them. And that would be a lot better. And we'd have a very, very different outlook. And you can see why we would never get this situation, by the way, because the Conservative Party in the UK, that frequently is in power, it's in power far more often than not, would not be in power as much at all with this system. And that is the problem of a political system. It's decided by the party in power, and the party in power reinforces that if they're going to change a political system at all, it's only in a way that's going to further solidify their power base, and certainly not act against it. And then you could argue the same thing in America as well. I mean, this is what was especially baffling for me. The president can be, when it's one or two candidates across the whole country, you choose, it's one of these two people is going to be president, and why wouldn't that be a straight up vote across the country? That's what baffles me. Why would that not be a straight up vote? Because it seems to me crazy that more than half of the people who voted, don't get their candidate elected. It's not the first time this has happened as well. So yeah, I mean, it is one of those things, and I think rather than going back to my original point, rather than people just wishing, oh, I wish such and such a person was prime minister, I wish such and such a person was president, we need to do more to actually campaign when we get an opportunity. Of course, each of us, very small reach, but when there are petitions, for example, for changing a political system, such as proportional representation be a huge one, it really would be a huge step forward in democratic terms, then at the very least what we should do is make sure that we sign those petitions, I think, and urge others to as well. But just imagine how different the system could be if Parliament or Congress, Senate, whatever, actually represented the spread of people, that you didn't have certain parts of the country where your vote counted for more than another part of the country, where it really was one citizen, one vote, and the government was actually representative of that population's voting patterns. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for further content, and until next time, I'll see you later.